and welcome back. Joining us via Zoom for our second conversation is Dr. Ydalia Metzgen. She is an economist and entrepreneur and co-proprietor of the business Calico Jacks Resort and Zip Lining and Money Smart Belize. She is joining us this morning to talk to us about personal debt. Good morning, Dr. Metzgen.
Good morning, Doc.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here.
We're talking about personal debt, and just before we start the conversation, I really want, if you could, for our viewers, highlight what that actually means. What is the definition of personal debt, and what we're trying to do to combat that?
Okay, so debt is a relatively simple concept, conceptually anyway. And it's like this: you earn a particular amount of income, and you have a certain amount of expenditure. And if your expenditure exceeds your income, you're in a minus position. So example, let's say your monthly income is $2,000 and you spend $3,000. Okay, so you will have a gap, okay, of 3 minus 2, which is 1,000. Now the question is, how do you fill that gap? If you have some savings, you could take out of your savings and meet that difference. If you don't have savings, now we're in the world of borrowing.
Yeah.
And you can borrow maybe from your family, or maybe you borrow from money lenders or banks. Basically, our options in Belize are more limited than they are in countries that are more developed.
Do you think that persons are already in personal debt before they even begin to work and attain a monthly salary? And I ask that question because in our generations today, a lot of persons graduate high school and they invest in college, whether they can afford it or they get a loan. And once they have finished that degree, they have to start working. But majority of the time, that loan is at 11% interest or so to pay it back. So they are now rallying to make that money to pay off that loan. So how are we supposed to prioritize our income if we are already starting off with some level of debt?
Yes, that is a really excellent characterization of where many students find themselves. But what I can say to you is the investment in yourself, in your own education, it's no different than investing, for instance, if you buy a home. You want to maintain the home. And it's the same for us as human beings. There's something called human capital. And there's no loftier, no better investment than investing in yourself. And so the good news is you may initially come out of school with that debt load, as the illustration showed, but experience in country after country, and I think it's the same for us here in Belize, is that the returns to education, that means what comes back to you from that investment over your lifetime. So you can't just look at this period. Over your lifetime brings you much more well-being and income than if you didn't invest in yourself. Now, our challenge in Belize is that in other countries, they have student loan programs that offer subsidized lending to students, so it's not as burdensome. You probably know in other countries like the United States, there's a big debate going on about debt forgiveness because it is a huge burden. So that's something that we could look at. I know that government does provide selective subsidies and scholarships. In some countries, like in Scandinavia, people actually go to school for free. but we don't have, you know, the resources to be able to do that. So the pragmatic part of it is to, you know, when you think about what you want to do, of course, it should be driven by your interests and your passion, where your heart is. And also you want to think pragmatically about, well, what will I do with it? Is it going to bring me a means of earning an income? Because that's the world in which we live. We also want to be financially responsible for ourselves, because we don't have many safety nets in Belize other than Social Security.
Doc, when you look at the situation of home ownership, particularly if we're talking first-time homeowners and their ability to be able to establish themselves by owning property and what have you, in many instances, those individuals have to borrow monies to be able to build their homes and what have you. What would you say would perhaps be an appropriate level? I'm not sure if there's a measure to this or what have you, but what would you say would be an appropriate level for indebtedness? If you're working, you're running a family, but you still want to be able to purchase and own property.
Yes, you know, debt is not in and of itself bad. As you're saying, debt actually becomes an instrument for us to meet our goals, fulfill our visions, our dreams. And there's a way to do it that actually benefits our lives. And to do that, we have to have a certain level of awareness around borrowing. We actually want to, and we also have to have some patience. Over time, we as human beings, we so want everything right now in the moment. For those of us who may be a little bit older in years, with experiences in earlier years, we had to wait to acquire what we wanted. And so one aspect is when you're setting your goals, when you're looking at your visions, is to say, okay, how do I phase it? You know, if my home is the priority, then let me focus first on my home. And now we go and we look at what are the options available in Belize. Fortunately, now there are mortgages. Before, you guys are probably too young to remember, there were many homes that you saw blocks, houses partially built because there were no mortgages.
Yeah.
So you actually had to wait and earn
and
buy your block and build it block by block. Now, fortunately, we don't have to do that now. But it does make sense if you want to avoid the distress and you know, financial distress and debt burden is so stressful for people. And so you want to, you know, look at your income, look at your day-to-day expenditure. You want to save. I know that's something that, you know, even if you save $1 a week, many people say, oh, I don't have enough income to save. But even if you saved $1 a week, the impact of that is just amazing over time. And you know, one trick is this, you know, most financial institutions don't lend to you if you don't have money. Of course, you want to go borrow when you don't have it. But you see, if you build a relationship with either your credit union, your bank, and for instance, take out a loan early, a small amount, and keep your word. Pay what you say you're going to pay. So now banks are willing to give loans. For instance, Belize Bank now has borrowing online without, you can just do it online without, you upload your documents, you don't have to come in for an interview. There are limits, time limits and monetarily minutes, and it's for customers and non-customers. And so maybe you start and you take a small loan and you repay it back. Now you're building your relationship with the bank. You're building your credit. And when you build that track record, I can actually tell you the sky's almost the limit. And now you have greater access to credit. So what we want to do is encourage our youngsters to build good financial habits, meaning good relationships with with the financial institutions that are in Belize. Don't be afraid to open an account. Now the good news is there's actually deposit insurance up to a certain limit. Before we didn't have deposit insurance. What's deposit insurance? It means if you put X amount of money in the bank and something happens to the bank, you're going to be repaid that amount. Before, we did not have that insurance. So banks are safe, they're sound. I know many people are hesitant about having a bank account or a credit union account. But that's the step to just as we have relationships with people, we have relationships with our doctors. You want to have a relationship with your financial institution, with your banker as well. So that when times are difficult, we all make mistakes. Say you make a mistake and you're overextended and you have this huge debt burden. They have a relationship with you. You have a track record. And they're more willing now to do what's called restructuring. That's maybe lower the interest rate a bit, stagger the payments out longer. And because you have the relationship, they can see you, they can see what you do. So I don't think you can be too early. You know, we get our kids, my kids and grandkids had, you know, credit union accounts and then bank accounts very early on. And you just get them to put, you know, if you give them, you know, $1 allowance, you put a shilling in. You know, it's just that you want to build the habit because we have habits around everything. And we want to build good habits around money and not be afraid of money.
But,
right? Because
but Doc, I hear you. I hear you. I know there's a lot more opportunities now. I know that banks are willing to negotiate with customers a little bit better now. But you know, we are living in a recession era where, you know, you gave the example of $2,000 and you're spending $3,000. That is the case for most people. So how do we relieve ourselves of that kind of debt where we can't really live? You know, it's becoming this state of and of course that does come with priority, but it does come to the state of my electricity bill and my rent costs more than what I make. So how can I relieve myself of that kind of debt?
Okay, so we have two types of issues, and you raised them in your question. One is what I would call a structural a problem where you're only earning X and your bills. And here I would make a distinction between necessities and luxuries. And some of us get these confused. Some of us say, well, I must have this and I must have that. And so one thing is to take a real close look at your spending habits and say, all right, what am I spending on? But I mean a serious look. Where can I cut or delay my consumption of some things? Okay, so for instance, maybe I'm eating chicken every day. So could I eat chicken? And I know that sounds, oh my God, I can't have chicken every day. Maybe you eat it 4 days a week. Okay, that's not particularly a necessarily great example, but I think you understand what I mean. That we want to sit down and really take a serious look at how we're spending. So, for instance, even for me, sometimes I look and I see, oh wow, what's going on? And I say, oh wow, I had these extra expenditures, which really I didn't factor in when I was thinking about where I would end up at the end of the month. And in my case, I go find another job. I go find some other activity to fill that gap. So one critical aspect is to actually do, and this word people cringe when you say budget, but all a budget is listing what do I spend my money on, and then looking at the other side and say, what money do I actually bring in? If it's a family, what money do we all bring in? Okay, and now we look at how do we spend it? Until we really seriously sit down and do that, and if we don't have the capacity to do that, then get help. There are people who will help and teach you. Just, you know, we don't really teach people about money.
Yeah. We don't want to talk about
and
money. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk
That's
about
right.
how
It's
much
a
we earn.
conversation that we shy away from.
Yes, but and I don't know
Yeah.
if that's just our culture,
Yeah.
but we don't want to talk about money. We don't want to talk about bills. We don't want to talk about expenses. And in my generation coming up, and this is a conversation I constantly have with my parents now, is that why didn't you tell me it would be this hard? Or why didn't you tell me that I would need to be able to read this contract thoroughly before I sign my soul away to this student loan? You know, so it's all of these different these different conversations that for some reason we don't want to have because we're afraid, or if we don't have the conversation, then it'll somehow go away, right?
Yeah.
And that's not really helping us in this new world. We're not financially literate.
there you have it.
Yeah.
There you have it. We started a company, Money Smarts Belize, because we were concerned about this. I mean, we all have kids and grandkids. Well, you guys don't have grandkids, but some of us have grandkids. And the fear around money, and it is cultural. If we have perceptions around money that somehow money is bad, then we won't want to talk about it. We won't want to learn about it. And so we want to look at, you know, what are my feelings, what are my emotions and my thoughts around money. You know, money is an instrument. It's a tool. It can help us realize our dreams, take care of, you know, maintain ourselves, our families. And in other countries, there's just basic literacy built into the curriculum in education. Or on the news, you constantly hear discussions about money. It's a part of the, you know, morning news show. And so you're right, it's cultural. We want to think about money as a help. I have a saying, I say we want to use money and love people. And sometimes we get it the opposite.
Yeah.
And so you're right, we have to demystify money and take the fear out of it, because there's nothing more stressful than to see somebody who's in that position. So we said sometimes it's structural. And in that case, the reality is that you can borrow if you have some prospect of generating future income. So it was your opening question, what about students? Well, students have a higher probability of getting out of that debt because they're going to have greater job opportunities. Okay, in country after country, this has been researched extensively, and people who get educated have such a bright horizon in terms of their income earning capacity. Now you have to get up and put the effort in. You can't sit home with your degree and say, I have a degree. Okay, it's the people who really don't have that. Now, what do we do with that? And you see in other countries, there are programs that assist those people by giving skills. It's usually by either skill-based or some form of education, again, to lift their job opportunities. And so in the meantime, that segment of the population is usually subsidized for a period of time, but the subsidy is linked to getting some type of skill. And so, but you can borrow, but when you borrow, you want to make sure that you have an idea of how you will repay that.
You have to be able to borrow responsibly.
Yeah, right. But
that's right, borrowing responsibly.
But I don't know how. I mean, you brought it up in terms of the persons that are not getting that degree, right? So most of these people do range in a particular poverty line, and they're not even in debt. So how are we supposed to combat poverty when the rest of us do have personal debt that can't seem to really budget or prioritize and pay these loans, and then you have these other persons that can't even make an income but still have bills to pay in some kind of way?
So the overall context is this: we are, although we're classified as a medium low income country in Belize, the reality is we really are not yet fully developed. And it's why the decisions that our government, our policymakers take are so critical for us, because they set the environment. And so you referenced being in a downturn or recession. If we can keep the economy growing, but not just growing, and that the distribution of that growth, that everybody's participating in, now we have an environment where people can thrive. But if the economy isn't doing well, remember what the economy is just what we are producing. Okay, we either produce it here with our own resources, or and get paid here, or we, for instance, tourism, basically we're bringing people here to spend money. That money gets distributed to the workers, to the agricultural sector, and this is where we get the financing that we need to live. So it's linked to actually how productive are we as a country. How, when the government takes our tax revenue, I mean, it's always very interesting. Governments seem to think they own the taxes. Those taxes come from people who are producing. Governments produce nothing. Okay? That is coming from you, me, everyone who's working, who's making a contribution. And the government takes a share, and the government's job is two. It's to use what they take. It's to help those who don't have as much. That's the redistribution function. And it's to provide goods and services that individuals wouldn't provide, like the police, defense, certain social services, clean air. If there's a mosquito infestation, spraying. So really, all we have is what we ourselves produce and generate. And it's up to a society to decide, okay, what do we want? And we have our Vision 2030. All of this is the broader policy framework that we've agreed as citizens of Belize, that is our vision for ourselves, for our children, their children. And that's supposed to be our roadmap of where we're going and how we're going. And so what we want to do as citizens is to say, okay, this is our contract. That's our social contract. This is what we've agreed as a society we want to do. Well, how are we doing?
Agreed.
I mean, how are we doing? And if we don't hold our leaders accountable, if we can be bought by a piece of land or $50 for a vote, independent of party, independent of party. I'm not speaking politics. I'm talking about us as citizens and our responsibilities. It ultimately comes back to us. Are we holding our policymakers accountable for how they spend the money they take from us? Okay, are they giving it to some to those who don't have a lot? Are they improving this roads, improving this, improving that? Now, for a country like Belize, we also get help from from outsiders, because we at the country level, we have a structural issue, because we are not, let's say, we have resources that we're not really using. And so we're not generating enough, let's say, for everybody. So then we have the so-called IFIs, the international financial institutions, who, we borrow from, or they give us grants, or we have, Taiwan. We get into these arrangements with partners who, countries borrow too, who give us money. But it's the same point, that then when our government borrows, they have to use those funds
to pay back
in activities in productive activities that will allow them to pay back. Or we have the debt. It's not the government.
It's the country, the citizens.
It's the country. We're the ones who are indebted. And so when you have that general environment, the way out of it is we have to produce, what we have to look at again, our behavior. What are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What are we doing? What is our government doing? How are they spending what we do have?
Yeah. Wow, Dr. Metzgen, you know, I think you tapped into a whole next level of this conversation that I think you have to come back and we have to discuss that because we are completely out of time. But we do want to thank you so much for zooming by and talking to us about this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Metzgen. Personal debt, we have to continue having this conversation. But we do got to take the break, and we are going to be right back with Belizean author Madeline Dyer, and she's here to talk to us about her new published book. Stay with us. We'll be right back.